Welcome to The Futurist Mom. Today's conversation explores a question that might sound like it came straight out of a comic book, but is actually deeply rooted in reality. How do we raise and recognize and support the real-life superheroes as children? Hi, I'm Nancy Giordano, a futurist, author, and mom of three, and an advocate for a safe and thriving future for all. And today we get to chat with my close friend and professional brother, Yarrow Kraner, who is a 5-time founder, curator, convener, and creative strategist who builds ecosystems that accelerate collaboration, has spent over 2 decades building communities around this very idea. Way back in 1999, 3.5 years before MySpace even existed, Yarrow created the Hero Project, an online platform that connected and empowered what he calls real-life superheroes. It grew to 1.5 million young users and was acquired by a major studio. The concept was simple but revolutionary. There's a superhero within all of us, and when we tap into their potential and support each other, extraordinary things happen, especially in children. In 2004, Yarrow founded Hatch, a global network and series of high-impact summits that connects and cross-pollinates diverse global influencers and next-gen youth leaders to accelerate collaborations and solutions for UN Sustainable Development Goals. By bringing together real-life superheroes again, from astronauts to composers, inventors to software engineers, Hatch has led to thousands of collaborations, companies formed, and systems changed at the policy level. The results have impacted hundreds of millions of people, and selfishly, many Hatchers have become my closest friends. Yarrow and I ruminate on how all parents can recognize, nurture, and celebrate the unique superpowers in their children, and how we can create the communities and connections that help those superpowers flourish, and in so doing, create the antidotes to many of the biggest worries we all have. Welcome to The Futurist Mom, Yarrow. Yarrow, I am so excited that you're jumping into this conversation with me. When I envisioned this podcast, I thought a lot about the people that would be on it. And I think about the people that I have in my world on a day-to-day basis, like people who've become part of my family, part of my world, part of the people I need to know. And you are very much one of them. So I'm excited that I get to introduce you to a broader group of people who are parents who may not have heard about you and your amazing history and the work that you do, but it's super profound and it really impacts with their lives as parents as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Nancy.
You have this amazing background in being able to identify or encourage or help people really reach, there's this amazing, not just potential, but impact. But you describe it through the lens of superhero. Should we start there? Like, what is a superhero and what is a superpower as you see it, as you look around in your world and think about the gift that you're bringing and pulling these people together?
Yeah, certainly. I was raised by a single parent mom, just her and she was sort of the first example I had of someone who could accomplish seemingly impossible things in the face of adversity. And yet I still had this sort of ideological pedestal vision of what a superhero was when I moved from small town in Montana to Los Angeles. And, I was convinced I was going to be meeting these exceptional, extraordinary human beings every single day of my life. And after a couple years of just sort of being a little bit underwhelmed, I started asking the question of like, where are they? Where are these people? And the moment that I asked that question, various different people started showing up out of the woodwork, out of the shadows. And it really had a moment of, after a few weeks of just one after another, meeting another single parent mom that donated their Saturdays as a soup kitchen, for the homeless, or a composer that was teaching deaf kids how to read and play music, a scientist working to piece the ozone layer back together, all shapes and sizes of these different individuals. I woke up one morning with this sort of aha moment that like they're everywhere. They're like literally inside each of us. And that perspective shift, that lens change for me was the massive inflection point in my life. And I ended up, starting kind of a movement and a company around that. I still subscribe to the belief that we're all carrying within us these extraordinary humans that some have yet to tap into.
So, I was talking to my son about this, my son Zane, and we were talking about this conversation you and I were going to have. And, Zane's always very provocative and always has this, a sideball question. He's like, okay, well, how do parents recognize the superpower in their children without then becoming obsessed about it or putting too much pressure on them or burning them out? Like, is it something that sort of gracefully unfolds as we think about, the fact that because I also agree that everyone has a gift, right? And I think in work with you and being at Hatch conferences, in which we all talk about it through the lens of being having a superpower, I think it's really, really profound. And I think that this is a podcast for parents who are thinking about their own children. And I think it's very comforting to know that each of our children has that superpower. So now you put on your hat as parent and say, how do I either recognize it or cultivate it or open the door to it without putting too much pressure on kids? Because they're feeling a lot of it right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the teens today are carrying, stress that rivals the adult stress of the 80s. And I think that without emotional safety creates burnout and not brilliance. And so the emotional safety component, and also the freedom and the encouragement to just express and to ask a lot of questions, to not have all the answers as a parent creates more of a dialogue. And it's probably why you have a son that is creating these provocative questions, because you've always encouraged him to be curious and ask those questions. So, the more expectation that gets placed on young people, they're more likely to develop depression and anxiety, and some of those things are increasingly harder to unravel.
I think that, so I think the tricky thing is as a parent, and now you are a step parent, right? So you have two young people in your life that you're really close to as well, is that balance, right? Between wanting them to be able to feel, the freedom to express and the freedom to be who they really want to be and develop who they're going to be because it's going to evolve over time, and wanting to make sure they have all the resources and making sure that they are well prepared. And I think right now my experience has been that parents are more focused and hyper focused on that to the extent that they have time to be, right? Also, they're very distracted by all the things that are going on in their life. So we as parents put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be able to deliver all of these resources and possibilities for our children. So I think, for me, part of what I've learned in being in the Hatch community and being around so many of these people who do the work that they do, there was just a natural curiosity they had, an innate thing that kind of was tugging at them from a very beginning. That I think that then, with the right space and time, had a chance to either blossom or, with the right constraints, had a chance to, also be expressed.
Well, there is sort of a dangerous line that I think a lot of parents walk in terms of wanting the best for their kids, but while also projecting their own purpose onto those kids. And so, something you said just a second ago, it's like allowing them to develop who they're going to be. Like, we don't exactly know who they're going to be. They're going to be themselves. They're not going to be mini versions of us. They have their own, you know, wired DNA and synapses and so on. But I think a lot of kids are corrected out of their future gifts because of some sort of projection from a parent or a teacher or authority figures in their lives. And, Sir Ken Robinson, who you and I both had the good fortune to spend some time with, used to say that, kids in preschool and elementary school ask hundreds of questions a day, but then by the time they get into, third, fourth, fifth grade, like, those questions have drastically been depleted because they've been sort of course corrected out of that. So the other thing I would say is, like, kids praise for effort develop, more resilience than kids praise for intelligence. And that, the failure is not the opposite of success. It's like literally the curriculum. And when you're a kid, the encouragement to have those failures at, like, low stakes, because as we grow older, those stakes grow higher. But to not have to sort of orient around perfectionism.
I do love that. I think maybe what I'm attuned to, right? Maybe, and this is just my story, maybe I'm projecting at this particular moment, right? Was that sense of feeling misunderstood. I was a really highly sensitive kid that was always told that she was too sensitive. And so the things that I felt or that I saw were, never amplified back or recognized. And again, my parents had a lot of their own literally shit going on. So I did carry that for a while. And it, took a while to shake that off and realize that that wasn't the truth of my experience. But even then, I mean, there's a producer who's working on this podcast with us, Jethro. He said something really kind the other day that reflected a stress that I had about trying to make something more perfect. And just the fact that he recognized that, I started getting weepy. Like, clearly I'm still
Mm.
carrying the sense of wanting to feel understood. One of the things I would encourage is for parents to really just to take time to try and see their children, even if they don't fully understand them. And they are very, and to your point, often wired differently. Just creating that space of feeling understood, I think goes a really, really long way. And I think, again, what I've heard over and over again in those shadow exercises is the call or the wish for that. I used to describe the Hatchers as the island of misfit toys. The people who felt as though they were in, the outlier in their families or in their organizations or in their communities, because they had these amazing things that they could see and do, but not everyone understood them.
There's an interesting piece that you just triggered for me, like the sensitivity and, like, you're too sensitive and so on. And I think we're seeing the results of some of the sensitivity being pushed out of males in this world, it starts to lead to some of the poor leadership that we're witnessing currently. But there's a neurodiversity expert, Dr. Thomas Armstrong, and he said that the traits that cause struggle in school are often the same traits that lead to success in life, and that curiosity leads to distraction, but sensitivity leads to empathy, defiance leads to leadership, imagination leads to innovation, intensity leads to purpose. Like these things can all be, we don't all just have our superpowers. We also have our Achilles heel and our weaknesses and so on. Like once you sort of spend time exploring what those are, they don't own you anymore. You get to sort of keep a sense of humor about them and mobilize those and potentially even convert those into superpowers, like sensitivity into empathy.
I definitely think that that is very, very true. Okay, so now to creating the environment. If we had the opportunity to redesign, like what a school looked like, or a learning environment, or a family, or a community, part of it is that there would be this range of resources that kids would be exposed to, right? You've talked a lot about that. That was a really important thing for you, and I think that's a big part of why you've created such diversity inside Hatch, or any of the work that you do. You like the cross-pollination that happens there. So if you think about it as a parent, I know I went out of my way. I actually even took a course on, or I went to get a lecture actually, to talk to someone about, should I keep feeding my child the same stuff because he really, really loves space? Should it all be about space? Or should I also encourage him to play baseball, or also encourage him to, you know, go do something else in the park? And she had a particular point of view on the axons and dendrites and the things that we feed and the things that we grow. So a long-winded way of saying, how do we add more diversity? What else can we do in an environment to stimulate the natural gifts in our children?
I that's a great question. I mean, it is really sort of one of my core operating thesis, and part of it is I think spending a lot of time by myself as a kid. I as an only child and a single parent mom that was working like 5 jobs and putting herself through her first family's college degree. Just that extra time and space and developed a sense of exploration and create and curiosity. And so I was always out, traveling the neighborhoods and the university and like talking to janitors and professors and just anyone who in the hallway would like stop and talk with me. And that has carried over, I think, when I moved to Los Angeles, where I thought I was going to just go meet all these interesting people, and specifically, I just wanted to meet people in film, and instead, I started meeting people in like science and all of these different expanded purviews, and I just recognized pretty instantly that when you find people that are unlike you, there's an expansion that happens. There's a growth that occurs. And so like whatever comfort zone that you're in, whatever wherever the edge of your, who you think you are was a moment ago starts to grow and expand when you're finding people with diverse perspectives or generations or lived experiences or ethnicities. And I think that's why travel is like one of those huge antidotes for people and the curiosity and the growth expansion. And also not everyone has the opportunity to go do that travel, but you do have opportunity to find within your own communities, like if you are more sort of left brain, science driven, like go find some artists to talk to, and vice versa. If you're in science and in Hatch, like you might be sitting next to an astronaut, a paleontologist, a 17-year-old kid that's got 2 patents on turning human waste into electricity, a farmer, an educator, someone who's an AI expert, a futurist who runs a Future Mom podcast. Like and everyone is like leaning in and learning from each other. And it's like, it's not how smart you are, it's how you are smart, right? It's like Harvard has all these studies around the different levels of intelligence around linguistic, emotional, spatial, musical, social, bodily, natural, and I think that sometimes parents get a little bit one-laned, but it's not even like through parenting and growth. I think that as we grow into our professional communities, those lanes get narrower and narrower because we're climbing up a trajectory that allows us to succeed, but only in that lane. And so Hatch offers people at that high level of expertise a chance to come in and like have the architect lean in and learn from the filmmaker, and the artist learn and lean from the aeronautics engineer and so on. Like you can solve problems that have been solved over here through a different lens in a completely different industry or vertical or discipline.
I thought of you the other day. I was reading something from the House of Beautiful Business. I don't know if you follow those guys, but Tim
Hmm.
Lebrecht and Ken Mickelson had written something about the theater of leadership development right now. And there's a really beautiful essay that they wrote, but there's a piece in it that I think was so profound about how we teach. The big line was about we call for innovation, but we don't understand creativity. And I think part of what you're describing right now is a really key tenet to creativity is having that horizontal expansion. It's having that curiosity to go and not know what the direct connection to that is going to be, the direct result of that is going to be. Instead of somebody who's only, has more experience than you in a very particular area and getting better and better and mastering that, it's really about the breadth of it, which I think is such a big, big gift that you offer. And I think that often we don't spend enough time cultivating, certainly as adults, and probably encouraging our kids to do. And it's one of those things they naturally did, to your point, when they're 3 and 4 and 5, if they had the opportunity, and then it becomes more and more narrow as they're trying to compete in school. So I think that this idea of creativity and nurturing creativity is such a center point, perhaps is part of why I jumped on at the beginning and thinking, gosh, if we could help everybody understand some of these core principles of what it means to be a creator or creating. People always ask me if I'm creative. I say I'm creating. To me, there's a verb difference that makes it easier to label yourself that way. But what are some of the key parts that you describe or think about? Because you are a natural creative. I don't even know if you can name them. But um, I think, what is it that we think that is missing in the world about people understanding about creativity?
There's a huge misconception, I think, around and underestimation of the power of creativity. I think when you ask a majority of the people around the world, well, especially in the US, because I think that European countries value creativity more than we do domestically here. Yeah, creativity, what is it? Well, it's a painting, it's a pottery, it's a nice to have, it's a thing that I might purchase. But people are sort of missing the point that like literally everything that we wear, drive in, live in, consume, use with the telephone, like every single thing that we touch and see and interact with on a daily basis was someone's idea. Someone
Including the
had a creative
Constitution, by
idea.
the way. Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
even just hard goods,
everything.
it's conceptual things, right? Yeah.
100%. Yeah, intellectual property. I mean, like it's endless, it's infinite. Like without creativity, it would be sitting there with, fire still. And maybe not even fire because that was creative thinking. So I don't know. It's like it's a real core thesis for us at Hatch in unlocking leaders who have, in many cases, sort of left creativity behind as a concept. And then when we bring them together, um, it's also a tool that really sort of unlocks people at a soul level. It's a universal language. It's ancient, and it brings people together across partisan lines in ways that you know, food and dancing and laughter and love have that capacity, but creativity is right up there at the top with how we bring people together around a shared sense of experience. There's all sorts of different quotes, and Einstein, had one of them around that we can't use the same intelligence that got us into this mess to get us out of this mess. And I'm paraphrasing, of course, but the creativity literally is, like that's why when we're working on like large scale systems change, we curate around a map of these different acupuncture points of how to move that system. But always, even the one that we just, had in Mexico last month, which was around depolarization and the future of healthy democracies, we have behavioral scientists and neuroscientists and political academics and movement building experts and leaders of it, like lots of different sorts. But we also have creatives and musicians and people that are there to sort of ask the provocative questions around like, well, hey, haven't you thought about X, Y, and Z? And why didn't you apply this lens to that problem? And 99 point, I mean, 100% of the time, they're asking the most important questions. We did a think tank with a huge consulting firm a few years ago, and they're like, "Hey, we really, we engaged Hatch and paid you to curate a room full of really brilliant people, and we, we wanted 10 from very diverse people, but you brought a cellist. Like, why did you bring a cellist?" It's like, well, music is math, and this person is a genius mathematician. It was kind of like a blank stare. And of course, later, not only did we bring the cellist, we also brought like a two-time toy inventor of the year. Nobody could figure out why. It's because they have a different way of looking at these challenges. They're not afraid to ask silly questions that suddenly become not so silly because they're going to end up becoming the solution.
Absolutely, and, you and I did a project that reminded me of the Wonder Project a zillion years ago, where we would do the same kind of thing, right? We curated rooms of interesting people to try and get a sense of where the world was moving on behalf of a client, and the clients came into that room too, but they had to learn to behave differently in that space. This wasn't just about extracting smart stuff from smart people. It was about being engaged with them. It was about having a reciprocal relationship with them. It was about being seen. It was about being vulnerable in various conversations about not knowing something or just being more
Mm.
seen as a person and not just as a professional, right? There was a whole like un just unveiling, I don't know what the word is, but like taking off a layer of this like mask of only being one thing and really having to show up as a person in that. And I think that's a big part of when we talk again about gifts and contributions that people are making. It's about this whole self. It cannot just be through the lens of as a role or focused only on efficiency and productivity, which is I think the thing that people miss, which is why I love that quote so much. Again, we ask for innovation or we push for innovation, but we don't understand creativity. Creativity doesn't get scheduled one, two, three. It's not an efficiency process, right? It is about taking time. It is about investing in these relationships. It is about showing up. It is about having confidence. And that, to your point about safety before, I think there's a lot about creativity that all of us have access to, but we have to give ourselves permission to be in spaces that cultivate it, including our families.
You're talking about accelerating relationships. I think, over the years, Hatch has even evolved from in the 21 years, it continues to iterate and sort of listen to the world. And we have moved away in the last like 5 years from focusing so solely on solutions to focusing on accelerating relationships and building trust, because the relationships then lead to the collaborations, which lead to the solutions. And I mean, it's not, we're not advancing a world of lone heroes. Like we're advancing through aligned humans and a community. And like the number one predictor of life satisfaction, according to, one Harvard study, is the quality of relationships, not achievement. And that human connection beats credentials. So, kids don't need more followers. They need authentic belonging and sense of purpose. And I think we would do well by raising young people through building agency and not anxiety.
100,000%. And actually, even when we start talking about the tech tools, I always make the distinction between the Silicon Valley people who teach their kids how to build with things as opposed to just be passive users of things,
Mm.
right? Everyone else is like making sure the kid knows how to
Consumer
use the
versus
tool, but I'm like, how
producer.
do you yeah, exactly. And that the agency that comes with I see a problem or I see an opportunity and I feel like I've got the capacity to be able to go do something about it, either innately from a creativity standpoint, or also that I understand the tools and I can go do something with it. So I think that's a really, really huge part. And I think a lot about it's a little sort of out of the scope of the conversation that we're going to have here, but I also think a lot about how these technologies are going to shift and change our children's ability. Like we talked about the 3 or 4 year old that asks why, which is both fascinating and draining as a parent. But what if your toy starts answering all those questions for you, right? You
Mm.
start asking your American Girl doll or your, train conductor and your whatever toy, whatever kids are playing with right now, or you start going then to character AI and building, your favorite version of a Fortnite character becomes somebody who speaks back to you, like it's going to be a really, really weird world in terms of having infinite ability to ask questions, but not a lot of trust necessarily in where those answers are coming from about this, right? Which is why, again, I think about raising kids in really strong and healthy communities is a really important part because I think we're not going to be able to see around all the corners and all the edges as parents.
Yeah, kids are inheriting a lot of complexity and uncertainty. And, like a lot of people are having conversations around what the future job market looks like. No one knows. I mean,
Well,
none of it is
I
for
have
sure.
some theories on that one, and we have a conversation. We had a whole podcast episode about employment
E-
is dead and what it means to build
Everyone has
uh,
theories.
well, I even if I had Nancy's world, I would know exactly what it would look like. So it's not like even impossible to imagine what it could look like. But actually, interesting when we did that conversation with Deborah Perry Pishoni, who literally just wrote the book "Employment is Dead," it really came down to a lot of the same things that you're talking about here about having agency, about being a creator and a builder, not somebody who is just like a cog inside someone else's machine. It's about being able to have confidence about that you've got something to contribute in the world and to have a community with which it is that you can go and build those things. So these things are all connected and tied to one another. But now if we go back to this conversation about like superpowers and superheroes, now I think what was fascinating to me a zillion years ago when I went to a TED conference is there was a woman who was giving a talk about her life's work, understanding how dolphins speak to one another. It was, an 18-minute talk, so it didn't last forever. But for me, it was like a very like long talk because I was like, I really don't care. I literally could care less about how dolphins talk to each other. I know that sounds really cold and awful, but I really didn't care. But I suddenly had this aha, sort of like the epiphany that you had once, which is if she has that really narrow curiosity, I must have a complementary one, right? That there must be this tapestry of like she's focusing on this, and then I get to focus on that, and Yarrow gets to focus on this, and Jethro gets to focus on that, and somebody else gets to focus on their thing. And so we get to have like I started realizing that our curiosity is as unique of an identifier as our fingerprint is. Like we all have very, very unique curiosities. And I think a big part of what the opportunity is at the moment right now is to help feed those curiosities, right? To nurture those curiosities in our kids and not put them all through the same extruder of having to be, a straight A student that gets high AP scores and can go to the same kind of university. I think that's the big invitation of the moment, is that we get to look at this very broad range of capacities and talents and superpowers that people have. What do you think?
100%. I mean, part of the model that we built with the Hero Project in 1999 was the ability to identify your own sense of agency and define, we really ask people to sort of interrogate themselves and define what it is that makes them unique and super and what lights them up and also to name their weaknesses and to sort of like keep a sense of humor, as I mentioned earlier, like navigate those. But the bait and switch was like once we had and there was had like digital currency, we gamified it. So you'd play these games to gather these points to rise up this karma counter to unlock these prizes. But along the way, there was a sort of a bait and switch Trojan horse where it said, how do you really save the world? Type in your zip code. And once you type in your zip code, we had pioneered this volunteer match engine and we would match people to one of 10 things they could do within a backyard, 3 mile radius of where they live to mobilize into the community. And they would go donate Saturday for a nonprofit, like walking dogs to the Humane Society, reading books to the elderly, neighborhood cleanups, park reclamations, and on and on. They would come back totally lit up because the people that were there receiving them would say, "Wow, what an amazing young woman you are! I mean, you really are a superhero." And like their chest would puff up, and they were like, suddenly there's have this whole oxytocin dopamine hit of like, "Wow, I'm doing something good for other people." So that sense of purpose would carry forward. They would come back and upload proof, and they would get 10,000 of these like digital currency knowledge nuggets. And suddenly we started mobilizing thousands, tens of thousands of people into their communities, and we had like a 500,000 volunteer hours in a year of that program. But that's when we started getting like letters from child psychologists and parents and teachers thanking us because we were letting young people know that they have this like deep and expansive reservoir within them that is purpose and that they can have a difference and to think outside of your own self. And I think in today's world of social media as a teen, and you're scrolling through, social platforms and comparing yourself to others and seeing what, everyone else is doing. It's like, there's also much bigger things to think about out there. And I think that is part of the gift that we have that's not expensive. It doesn't, it's not, doesn't cost a lot of resources. Like you can literally just find something for your young person to do in the neighborhood nearby. And it's going to suck the first time you're dragging them kicking and squealing to the front lines of that. And then they're going to just be lit up. And that I think can prove to be like a real drastic inflection point for loneliness and depression. And it's, the idea that you can actually have an impact on other people.
I think, when you were talking about agency before, I was going in a different direction, but I hear you on this one, which is the fact that if you just get out there and start doing something, it does start to feed that flywheel, right? You start to feel more and more encouraged and whatever the word is, incentivized just emotionally to do that, even if you aren't gamifying it. People just feel really good when they get to go do that. And I don't even know if they would go kicking and screaming. We just don't have a lot of opportunities, right? If we're not going to churches and organized religions like we did, because a lot of that used to happen through that kind of channel. And I feel like that has become less and less a huge focus in many people's lives. I'm not advocating that it needs to be, but I'm just suggesting that, we've lost a lot of these community elements that allowed it to be seen that somebody else needed something or that we could go do something. I remember my children were really young and we were trying to figure out things to go do on the weekend. You could go back in the early days of the internet, like find a zillion activities to go do, but not a lot of contributions that you could make. And I was going to start something called Families for Others, which would be a whole list of ways in which you could go volunteer in all these different places and do all kinds of interesting things. And then, it was one of the 47,000 ideas I've had that didn't make it out into the real world. But I wanted there to be a platform that made it easier for us to go do that. But you're suggesting that you just go find it anywhere in your neighborhood or in your community and just start doing it?
Yeah, I mean, we that's what the platform we built did. I was really proud of it. When we got acquired by a major studio, they didn't really get it, and they kind of lifted the hood and rummaged around and grabbed some of the gaming mechanics that we had built out, and didn't understand how everything sort of connected and what the volunteer match engine did, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I haven't looked recently, but I have to believe that there's potentially something out there.
This is where I think, again, the advantage of being a younger parent right now, because I think there's so many more ways in which we can find connections to these things or access to these things. And so if someone's listening and has a suggestion, please put it in comments. And if you haven't seen that exist, let's go put that together, because I think it should exist again on the planet. I really do think that you are right, that not just about building community, but engaging in community and contributing to community and building community is a really, really key part of how we navigate this future more successfully. So now let's scope it out and talk about the work that you're doing now in terms of why it's so important that we connect to our superpowers and that we engage in communities to start building the sense of agency.
Well, there's no shortage of big challenges on the planet right now when you think about inequities across the board of, poverty, justice, climate, education. I mean, there's just kind of on and on and on. The fact that we're sort of facing an authoritarianism regime right now. There's a couple different things. One that we're noticing is that people that are on the front lines of, pushing this sort of boulder up the mountain of purpose, are exhausted, like right now, like more than ever before. Like leaders are becoming beat up and tired, and so to refuel them, like we need these people at their full capacity to continue to do the work that they're doing. I had a call this morning with someone out of DC who came to Hatch, a month ago, and like I had no idea that I needed this. Like I came back with full vigor, ready to really tackle these things that I've been working on for the last 15 years, that I was almost to sort of ready to tap out of. And so, and doing that in community, right? Like when you recognize that you're not alone, there's other people that are also rolling the boulder up the mountain of impossible odds. Like, oh, well, let's like that shared empathy is instantly a bonder. And also, but I think to another part of your question is the way that we curate diverse perspectives. Like you don't need 16 corkscrews on a Swiss Army knife. You need the nail file and the little scissors, and like you need all these different tools to come together to form, what I would call sort of like a power pod. And because you need strength who's aligned with other people's weaknesses and vice versa. Like we all need each other. We can't just get through the world alone. And so let's, commit to lifelong learning, not just through online platforms, but like in person, uh, with retreats, with dinner parties, with, how can we bring perspectives together that feed and fuel and grow us, and to lean into that difference. Like in our sameness, we can become very comfortable, but in our differences, we continue to grow and expand.
Now, you have become a stepdad, right? In the last, is it 10 years?
Yes.
How does joining a family with kids that are looking at the world, that are younger, obviously, than you and most of the Hatchers, how did it expand your understanding of the world? And how did you potentially bring some of all your hatchiness into their lives? Like, I'm just curious. We talk about this as a futurist mom because I had this cross weave. Being a futurist allowed me to be, I think, a more open-minded mother. And because of the mother, obviously cared so much more about where the future is actually going. Like these two things really fed each other. Was there something that you were surprised that you learned as you watched it now through the eyes of young people at home?
So many things. I mean, first I'll say that I was dealt several lessons of stark humility.
Welcome to parenthood,
And
baby.
that was like an overnight lesson. I was like, huh, I think I'm gonna have my ass handed to me every day for the next how many years. And frankly, it was a little painful at the beginning. And then I really had to sort of like have a conversation with myself and sort of reorient and be like, okay, I'm growing here. This is I'm learning. And and even to the point where, initially I think I'm really, I love the work that I get to do, the people that I get to do it with. I'm inspired by the people I get to surround myself with. I feel like the differences that we're creating and making are tangible, and I get, so I would come home and have conversations about some of those things. And yeah, I remember pretty early on, it was like I wasn't really getting any sort of read or reflection of energy off of either of the two, the son and daughter. And I think at one point, one of them just turned to me and said, "You make it sound like the stuff you do is so important," like with a yawn. And I was like, "Well, I'd like to think it is. I mean, it's what kind of keeps me moving forward. Otherwise you could just sort of like lose hope and give up." And so, yeah, it sort of fuels me. But even in that moment, I just recognized, like, all right, I'll probably talk about this a little bit less, and start asking a little bit more questions and be curious. And we also had one child that was very talkative and did it like absorb and a lot of the sort of the Hatch ethos, and came to two Hatches as a freshman and as a senior within the Next Gen program, and learned a lot. I think she told me that it was a big inflection point in her life. He was not interested at all. Like he really prefers, outdoor pursuits and skiing and fishing and more, sort of kind of organic, natural, hanging with friends. And I had to, I had to learn that. And at some point, it's like, this is him, this is me. I don't have to impose my enthusiasm onto everyone. Like some people are going to take to it naturally, and some are not. And so I think letting them both be them. I think I was, at the beginning, I was like literally trying to impress them because I wanted them to like me. And then recognizing that like the less I tried, the probably more um possible that them liking me would be.
The
So,
cooler you became. Yeah.
yeah, I was like, let me just like lean backwards instead of lean forwards.
I think it's an interesting point that you make, though, about this enthusiasm that you and I have, and this ability that we have to go and travel in the world and get to see these amazing people and amazing ideas, amazing things, and then bringing them home, and in a way that doesn't make it seem as though their daily lives are too small, right? Or the day-to-day conversations that we have aren't meaningful enough, or that, whatever it is that you're doing. Like I talk a lot about the big stuff, but I have started talking a lot more about micro actions, the words that we
Mm,
use, or the kindness that we show in a moment, or there's a lot of really tiny things that we can do each day that really have giant ripple impacts. And so it doesn't always have to come through this big, massive lens. I just came back from a trip recently, and Zane, again, the son that and I were sitting in
yep.
the car. It always seems to be like this a little crucible moment. We get to sit in the car in the garage and have this like deep conversation. And he was talking to me about some of the real fears he has around the political structure in the US at the moment, and his own safety and his own future. And just, he's a really, really sensitive kid. He feels that stuff. And he just felt really, really nervous and worried about it. And I immediately put on my superhero cape and wanted to protect him from feeling any of those things, and started to, launch into all the things that are going right in the world and all the ways that we can change things and all the da 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 da. And I went to my and a few days later, he and I had a much deeper conversation about how he felt really not heard in that moment. And that I didn't connect to the depth of feeling that he had, but I immediately
Mm,
wanted to rescue him from that feeling. Because it's really hard to watch your child feel overwhelmed by the world right now. And you do worry that they're getting way too much red pill content, and you want to be the counter programming to that. And I realized that we were both probably right. Like I did want to offer an alternate narrative to the one that he was telling himself at that moment, but I needed to step back first and listen to where he was and be more comfortable with the uncomfortable that he was feeling, which I think is a really hard thing
amen.
for you and I in particular to do, because we work really hard not to be in that space too long, you know? So I think that,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think I think you and I both also are capable of feeling the pain of the world, and it's the optimism that is the flame that keeps us moving forward. And so that when that flame goes out, it's like you might as well just check out.
Well, that's what I meant. My older son, who was a bit more pragmatic on all this, and he was very similar to the experience that you had, like when I was doing all that TEDx stuff and I was dragging Hugo into it, and Hugo was like, "This is not my world." I am not interested. But here's Zane. Let me let my younger brother step in, and Zane obviously we never really did. But Hugo teases me. He's like, if you weren't optimistic, mom, you would just fold in.
Hmm.
Like you need to have this sense of being endlessly optimistic so that you believe it's possible that we can shift and change things, because otherwise it'd be too hard to bear.
Amen.
And I think that's true. I think that that is very true. By the way, we optimists also live what 15 to 20% longer than others. So I do think it's a good inoculation to have, even if we are full of complete delusion. But I don't think we are, right? I think that the work that you're doing, you're starting to see opportunities to make a bigger impact.
Just on that, just a quick note, there was like a science study that was done in Japan where they, our bodies are made of roughly like 70% water, and so is the planet, and that's not an accident. There was an exercise that was done in Japan where they had these huge sealed containers, like steel sealed from all elements, with all these jugs of water. And in one of those, they had a bunch of people that were in there like yelling mean things at these jugs of water, and at the other, there was a bunch of people yelling or whispering like love and positive affirmations and optimistic messages to this water. And then they tested the water, and one of you know, the bin from the left that was sort of receiving all this like hatred and angry emotion was, you could literally see it under a microscope, was like disjointed and fractured, and also that kind of water is not good for your body to ingest. And the water that was receiving these more positive affirmations was like optimized and much more healthier to ingest as the for our bodies like that. Think about that in terms of the media that we take in and the things that we're telling ourselves. Like, it is lodging itself in at a molecular level. And so it's not just that we are optimists, it's also that we are trying to sort of attune our bodies to be the most efficient and effective and healthiest, and offer that to others as well.
1000%. There's just a study out of UCSB that actually didn't come from the psychology department. I think it came through the comms department. But if you just spend, I thought it was like the first 15 minutes of the day watching inspiring content, maybe it doesn't even have to be that long. It could be just be 3 minutes of the day. It completely rewires your sense of what you think you can do, resilience, and that they should even have 10 days later, that your ability to handle stress is better if you just
Hmm.
feed yourself good stuff from the very beginning of the day. But I'll just laugh about that research, which I remember reading about many, many years ago. And there's another test that had been done like that with rice. You could talk to like a thing of rice and either, be really negative or be really positive. And so, of course, I tried to do that test in my garage with the children. I was trying to like speak really awfully to one and like really positively to the other, and it didn't work. So either I couldn't be that mean to the one rice, or maybe it was just a failed experiment. But I just laughed at home. I really tried to like bring that research home so they could see it. Didn't quite work.
Love it.
But, at least we gave it a good try. All right, well, as we round out this conversation about what is possible, and we go back to the thesis of this idea that we are all hopefully raising children who feel like superheroes and can connect to their superpower, which I think is a really, really important part, general in life overall, but particularly in this moment in time where it feels like there's so much happening around us and we don't have it's easy to believe that we don't have any control or any ability to impact it. I think it's really important, again, to feel that locus of control and that sense of agency and that sense of that you are not the only one who's seeing or hearing or feeling it. Because part of it is having community that you can do something with. But I will also say I have found it's really important for me to be in communities that can also see the same things that I can see. Then I don't feel so overwhelmed by it. I'm sharing then this concern, and that feels much easier than to navigate. So if you're listening to you're a parent of anywhere from 2-year-old to 22-year-old, because I get a lot of parents with older kids who actually are really worried about this right now. I'm really worried about their kids' ability to navigate the future. Any thoughts and points of either wisdom or questions that you would encourage them to ask themselves?
Ask themselves or ask their kids?
Either way, because I think it's both. I think that sometimes it's like, how are we approaching it, and then sometimes it's about what's going on for our kids. So I think you could go either direction. But I guess I'm just saying it's like you have this. I think you don't realize, Yara. This is the part where I think I'm trying to draw out, and I'm not doing a very good job. You have this incredibly unique perspective on the world. You spend so much time in the world with people who are very actively seeing the problems and designing solutions to the problems, and you're part of it. What do you love to explain to people who aren't in this world that you see? Like, if you ever talk on a stage, what is it that you most excite to talk to people about the worldview that you have?
Uh, well, a few things. I mean, one is I think I really do prescribe to the appetite of shifting your own perspective. Whenever I hear something that makes me uncomfortable, I sort of take a beat and really try to think about that, like where that came from, why that was said from that person's lens and perspective. I would, mentally kind of take a step to the left or to the right to try to understand what where that is coming from and what the intended message in that is. And so the perspective shift for me has like worked my whole life. Like, we grew up in like serious poverty and we're homeless for a year and a half, and we're like donated cabins without lights and electricity in the middle of winter. And every time I just remember thinking like I would just sort of shift my perspective on, wow, this is an adventure. Or it's like I just noticed that looking back over my lifetime that has really served me well. And I don't know if that's a coping mechanism or, I think it is, but it's also served me well. And as things get a little bit dicier in a more polarized, country, that continues to serve me well. And by asking also share more, when I hear that perspective, like say more rather than having instantly, something that is going to feel like a judgment within my own heart. Like I want to understand. And so I think we could all do well with a little more grace and passion around trying to understand where people are coming from. There's also a bunch of data that's come out recently that like we're much closer on many of these issues than we think we are. And the news is profiting from exacerbating that division. And so to better understand, ask someone specifically, like say more, share more. And in terms of like what I ask when I'm talking with leaders who have never even met me before and I'm getting ready to invite them to Hatch, it's not all about their work. It's like, what do you love? What lights you up? What drains you? Like what feels hard right now, but still meaningful and worth fighting for? Like, what do you get up in the morning for? Like, what's keeping you up at night? Like, these are questions that start to help me sort of see beyond the resume and the person. And I think those same questions are really valid for a dinner time conversation with a teenager when you're starting to ask less about their grades and more about sort of what's bringing them energy and what's draining them. uh, then you're starting to address them as an equal human and not as I mean, being a parent has a little bit of built-in hierarchy. And when you start, I've always loved how you parented your young ones, not even young anymore, but like they have equal ground on those conversations. There's a shared sense of a respect in the answers that you're going to get. And I think that has really contributed to building some incredible young humans. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for the grace on that. We were talking about also really was considered a hardcore disciplinarian, and Harper will tease that she was scared to death of me, so, which worked out really, really well in very many circumstances. So it went both ways. But I just remembered, I just totally out of the blue, that you were also at Burning Man when I took Zane to Burning Man when he was 15, which was a really
Oh, that's
interesting
right.
decision for me to have made. But he will talk about that as being a very, very seminal experience for him, and being able to see alternative, back to your point very early on about alternative points of view, what is a construct, choices that people make about how they present themselves and different things, the kinds of questions and conversations we get to have there, shielded him from some stuff because it was a little, whatever. But even then, at that point, he's 15, he could go online and see anything he wanted to go see. So at least see it in real life
Yep.
with people who are having conversations around it. Like it felt, yeah, like an interesting thing to do, because to not shield our children, right? But to really be in there with them and learning with them, I think is a really, really key part of this. And I think just as you're saying all this stuff, I think that that is probably the biggest thing, is that parents are walking into a world right now in which they don't understand what's happening. And they want to have this, my sense of, is a strong front for their children to make it seem like we've got it all figured out. We know what it is. And sometimes for some people, we're doubling back on the old ways in which it had been done. If we could just get back to that nostalgic moment in time when we understood all the rules, it's all going to get better. And for other people, they just sort of leave it up to the internet to teach our kids what's going on. And I think really stepping in and learning with them and figuring out what some of these platforms are doing or not doing with our children, hearing and seeing what it is that they're curious about, and being really open to those answers and not being scared when they tell us because I think we're so afraid to hear what they're going to say about some of these things sometimes. And I think, again, just that belief that each of our children has something really, really unique to be bringing to this moment in time, and that our job is not to build it or to shape it, but it is to nurture it and to release it. I think that that is a really just an amazing gift of parenting. And I think we're way too hard on ourselves sometimes. And it doesn't have to be as hard as we make it. They're showing us who they are, right? Our thing is not to
Amen.
stomp it out. And then there's definitely mistakes I made as a young mother that I wish I could go back and redo. But even then, to have grace with yourself. We're all here figuring it out together.
I'll just say a couple of different things about this sort of next generation that is growing up right now in a really interesting and complex world. The thing that never gets outdated is the belief in someone. And so the continuous, I see you, I believe in you. And these are things that are not going to get replaced by AI. To encourage young people to sort of know their difference is not a weakness. It is literally their superpower. And to identify their own slice of genius and creativity, and then find others who have the opposite to be able to learn and grow from that. And I hope that parents also recognize how, the brilliance comes in all these different unfamiliar forms, and that, you know, try to help build this world in which choosing between fitting in and fully becoming themselves is not the question. It's letting them just sort of uncover who they are, and knowing that there's this gem inside. Like, I always sort of picture this transceiver that glows, but it also grows plaque. It gets diminished, it gets borderline extinguished sometimes, and you got to blow that plaque off through letting people know how amazing they are, and you can see things for themselves that they might not even be able to see for themselves. And so it's just these are all like sort of tools that I've continued to try to practice and sharpen and focus in my daily world, and the people I get to meet and run into.
Which is why we are so loyal to you. I remember very early on, and you haven't done it in a while, Yara. When I used to send you a text, you used to just write back, "You're awesome." Like you used to have all these positive affirmations. But I just say because it was really important, right? There are just days where someone just says, "Hey, you're awesome,"
Yeah,
without having to
amen.
have owned it or proved it or delivered anything in order to receive that.
Nancy,
It could literally just be it.
you're
Yes,
awesome,
Yara. Thank
truly.
you, Yara. So are you. You are super awesome.
Appreciate
And
you.
I'm very grateful for the ride that we get to be on together. I'm glad that we found each other so many years ago, and that we get to continue to dance together, and these events that we create, and communities that we get to share, and dinners that we get to pull together, and spaces that we hold for each other. So thank you for everything that you do, and for also extending that then to the next generation. I really appreciate that Zane is a part of Hatch, and that ripples out to his whole network and his whole world too. So thank you for taking care of the next gen with such love.
Mm. Thank you, Nancy. Appreciate you.
All right, my friend, let's go and make the world shine bright each and every day. Mwah. Love you.
Love you too. Great to see you. I'll see you in person soon.